All statements and opinions expressed by guests of this podcast are not representative of the Orthochat, its host, or its producers, and should not be associated with the podcast unless explicitly stated by the host.
You are listening to the Orthochat by Yanni Katsadas.
Σιγαργατάκησε όλος τη αμαρτία και παρεδόθης τελείως τη ραθυμία της εξαναστήσης σε κείμενο.
Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ ελέησον, 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 Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ ελέησον. Greetings in Christ, brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 16 of the Orthochat. We are here with Archimandrite Maximos Weimar. Father, how are you?
Very good, very good. It's good to talk to you today.
It's good talking to you. Thank God. What's new? Everything's well?
Well, in a monastery, it's Great Lent, so that's the top subject. We're starting, I've been here for a few months. We're starting a skeet in Coconut Creek, Florida, St. Pantaleimon, the Great Martyr Skeet. We're dependency of Monastery of the Glorious Ascension. But we started here because there's a community down here, so I've been focused on building the chapel and ordering things and doing all that kind of sundry stuff that people don't think monks do. We have a lot of, like yesterday, I spent my time putting together bookshelves. So
that sounds fun. I love building stuff, and we're always welcoming of more warm weather monasteries. I'll tell you that much.
Well, we need it down here because there's Rocor used to have the monasteries that went with Father Belia. And we no longer have those, so we're the only Rocor monastery in English speaking in Florida. So it's been a challenge.
Well, I pray that the challenge can be overcome through prayer and through Christ's strength. Would you like to start us off with a prayer?
O Heavenly King, the comfort of the Spirit of truth that ever are present, full us to all things, treasure of good things and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every stain and save our souls, O good one. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, unto the ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. With the prayers of Holy Fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Amen. So let's go back to the beginning of time as far as you're concerned. Tell us a little bit about your young life and what about it instilled within you a calling towards the clergy.
I was born in New York, on Long Island. My family was non-religious, not anti-religious. My father had been Roman Catholic, and he left the Roman Catholic Church because of Vatican II. My mother was a theoretical Lutheran, but she never went to church. So we were raised in a family. I have an older brother and sister. We were raised with very little religious instruction. My father was a believer in some way and talked about God or whatever, but there was no formal religion. And I always, from the very earliest day, I believed in God. I always had a sense of that God is there and he's watching and he is looking out for us. But I was not, since I was not formed in any kind of religious tradition, I never thought of being a clergyman or a monastic, although my mother tells, my birth name was Lewis, but my mother tells a story that when I was 5 years old, I talked to the family and I said to them, my name is Max. And I insisted on being called Max for like 2 weeks. And then, of course, you're 5, you forget things. So
a little bit of foreshadowing.
A little foreshadowing because I became Maximus. I moved when I was young, I moved to South Carolina. And I started going in my late teens, early 20s to an Anglican church, continuing, not Episcopalian, but continuing Anglican. And then I became exposed to the notion of liturgy and tradition. And our priest there began teaching us, study the fathers. And then most of us came to the conclusions like, well, this is true. Tradition is true, but this church itself is just not carrying it. We actually had a meeting with our Anglican bishop, and he told us stories about, well, you'll be in a church and you won't be able to speak, they won't speak English and blah, blah, blah. So I think 3 of which are now priests, converted to Orthodoxy in the early 90s. And for me, I was never really anything else. Even when I was an Anglican, it was not, I was just wanted to be Christian. And I looked at Orthodoxy as Christianity. So I was in my early mid-20s when I became Orthodox, and I immediately had a love for liturgy and liturgical practice. And we were altar servers, and I had hoped one day to be a clergyman of some sort. And since I was in my mid-20s and I wasn't married, I told God, I said, make it clear what you want me to do. And when I was 28, a couple years into Orthodoxy, 2 years into Orthodoxy exactly, there was a place in South Carolina, Rose Hill College. I don't know if you remember, it was an Orthodox college. And it was owned or run by a wealthy man, Serafim Jones. And he and I were not particularly friendly. We weren't enemies, but we were a little, And one time he called me and he said, I need you to go up to the monastery in Resaca, Monastery of Glorious Ascension, and help them out. And I'm like, I can't just pick up. I have a job, I have rent, whatever. And he said, I'll pay your expenses while you're gone. He said, just go up there. And I'm like, okay. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but some guy who doesn't particularly like me is calling me and he's going to pay my rent and do everything while I went up there. So I went up there, and after a couple of weeks, I went to the abbot, Father Damien, and I asked him to be a novice. So that was 1995. And then early on, shortly after I became novice, I had by this point already become a subdeacon. He said, you need to prepare yourself to be a deacon and priest, because he was older and he wanted a younger priest to be older priests always want a younger priest to help them out. And so in 1997, I was tonsured a monk. That's where I became Maximos. And then 98, I was made a deacon. And then 2000, I was made a priest. So, and people asked me, I saw some of your other questions. I'm sort of conflating it together. In a monastery, it's very different, I think, than people who are married priests or people who go to seminary. It's not a sudden, jolt. I want to do this. It's just a day-to-day, slowly, siga, moving towards it. And I remember after I was made a priest, it was during Lent I was made a priest. And I remember where the services at the monastery were very long, like 5 hours, 6 hours. And I'm there, and I'm in the church, and I'm in the stall, and I'm tired. So I'm like sort of nodding off a little bit. And then everything got quiet. And I was looking around. Why did everything get quiet? And then the abbot, Father Damien, was looking at me with this stern look. I'm like, why are you looking at me? And then I looked down, and I'm wearing a cross. I was like, oh, I'm a priest. It was my chance to do it. So I did my exclamation. So I think, I think that it's different. It's different. It's an obedience. One of my spiritual fathers told me that being a priest, and there's a little bit of an exaggeration, being a priest is an obedience like washing clothes or mowing the lawn. And it is to some degree, because you're serving the community. Now, a priest is a priest is a priest, so there is a little, it's a little different, but that's how it started.
Right. So, you made it into...
I told you I rambled.
I like it. It's fine.
Okay, all right, good.
You knocked out a couple of those, and it's like, so, what is an archimandrite for those who aren't familiar? Because the word may seem foreign to even Orthodox Christians,
right,
let alone people that are not within the faith.
Well, originally, what an archimandrite was, it's from arche, the Greek for first, and mandros. It was the first. Mandros was the fold. So it was the leader of the fold, right? So it was used early in the church interchangeably with abbot, igumen, or igumenos. Eventually, it became, in the early church or middle church, it became somebody who was in charge of several monasteries. So you'll see that title applied to Theodosius the Synoviarch, who was in charge of several monasteries in Palestine. And then in the Russian church, it became a title for big monasteries. Abbots of big monasteries were called archimandrites, and little ones were called igumen or igumenos. And today, in many of the churches, most of the churches, it's also a honorific title. So you'll have, like, for example, in the Greek Archdiocese and in Greece, you'll have many archimandrites who it's become the monastic equivalent of archpriest. But interestingly, I'm actually I'm an archimandrite in the original first, early century of the church, because I run several monasteries. So in the Russian church, also, it became they attributed to an archimandrite a lot of episcopal, swag. So in the Russian church, they have they have mitres and mantias like bishops and sticks and things like that. So, but an abbot for example, in Greece, abbots are always archimandrites. So on Athos, the abbot is always an archimandrite. And in Greece itself, many of the parish priests are archimandrites. In the Russian church, it's a little rarer. Usually it's either somebody who they're going to promote to a bishop, and so they're made archimandrites relatively young, or it's somebody who's going to be made an archimandrite after like 30 years. Now, I was made an archimandrite in the Greek church. I was made an archimandrite by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Patriarch Irenaeus. So I was made one when I was young. I was 36. And then I came to the Russian church, and that caused some, not scandal, but some people were very,
friction,
very
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it for sure. So you mentioned you were the head of a couple monasteries, and you still are. And what did the beginning of that look like? Like, when did you start being the Yerunda of your first monastery? When did you start to develop other ones? Like, how does that kind of go?
I started at Monastery of the Glorious Ascension in Resaca, Georgia. And that's where I went for my early monastic life. And then in 2003, Father Damien, who was our abbot, he was convinced that ROCOR was never going to reunite with Moscow. It was never going to be back in union with the rest of the church. And he had been a priest in the OCA for many years, and he was he missed being able to serve with his friends who were priests. And so he contacted the Jerusalem Patriarchate, and they were at that time establishing parishes in America. So we invited Archbishop Damaskinos, who was at that point the exarch, and he came and visited our monastery, and he said he would accept us, but there were conditions. And one of the conditions was I had to go to Long Island because they had a shut down monastery there, Holy Cross Monastery. So I went up there in 2004, and I was told I was going to be there to help out for a few weeks. Well, we went to a visit in the city, Archbishop Damaskinos and I, and we had an interview with Archbishop Demetrios of the GOA. And Archbishop Damaskinos said, "This is Father Maximos. He's the abbot of the monastery in Holy Cross," that's how I found out, was when he told somebody else. So
that must have been a little bit of a shock, huh?
I looked at him. He says, yes, I was going to tell you, Father. But anyway, so I was there in 2004, and there was nobody going there. There was no monks. It had been shut down for a decade or more. And my goal was to build it up, and we did. By the time we left, we had a congregation of 100, 150. We had, I think 7 monks. And so we did well. It took some time, but when in 2010-ish, Jerusalem basically said they were withdrawing their jurisdiction from America. So then we were there occupying what they considered their property. And we were hoping for some sort of, resolution. But finally, in 2017, they said they wanted the property back. Okay. So we knew it was coming because we actually created the next monastery in 2015. So we knew it a few years before. So with the blessing of Metropolitan Hilarion, we created the monastery St. Dionysius the Areopagite, which is in St. James, New York. And we acquired the property there in 2018. So even though it was a separate monastery building, it was essentially the same brotherhood, right? Because we just all moved over there. And so I was there. I was the abbot there from 2015, and we decided, the brotherhood decided to establish this skeet. We were donated the property for this skeet in Florida, and then it was too much to run 3 separate institutions. And so there was my spiritual son, Father Vasilios. He's a young priest, but we decided that the best thing to do, he's from there. He's from Long Island. He's got, he's young and he has energy. We decided that he would become the abbot there in Long Island at St. Dionysius. I'm the abbot emeritus there, so I have certain, prerogatives there. I still have a cell there. And I would focus on Resaca, which I'm the abbot of, and St. Pantaleon's. So, so so we're still one, the Greek would say, we're still one synodia, and I'm the erenda of the synodia, but we have 3 locations. And we also have a mission or a chapel in Alabama, St. John Cassian in Alabama. And that's a complicated story. So I think we have like 6 priests in our synodia. There's a little diocese.
I mean, little diocese, but, permission to speak frankly, how do you juggle all that?
Well, I mean, it was difficult. It was extremely difficult. And that's why we had Father Vasilius become the abbot there, because he was the deputy abbot for several years, but, it's not the same. And he's a young man. He has a lot of energy. He came to the monastery in his early 20s. And, so he's trained, he knows what he's doing. And people in their mid 30s, that's when he's old enough to be president of the United States. So, right. So I'm focusing primarily on building up this monastery, and I'll also spend more time in Resaca at a monastery of the Glorious Ascension, because it essentially, if they were closer, but if you have 2 institutions that are 1,000 miles away, it's a little difficult. So
I could imagine. And I wanted you to speak a little bit about this subject because I feel like it's something we can all pull from. And with you having so much experience around monastics, being a monastic yourself, what is the relationship between a monastic and their abbot look like? And how can the laity use aspects of that relationship to improve their own spiritual lives?
That's a hard question, because a monastery or a monastic community is a family, just like any other family. And the abbot is the father of the family. But fathers are different, depending on the situation. Monasteries, are different depending on who's there. So the abbot, and also it depends on where in his life he is. An older abbot, like on Athos, very frequently, the abbot is the administrative head. He runs the monastery, and there's a yerenda who's older. He's the spiritual father, but he's not dealing with the day-to-day stuff, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to do now. But the relationship there is father and son, and always that's the case. And like the father, if we look at history, the most difficult relationship in human history is the father-son relationship, because the father is teaching the son to be a father. And I point out in the monastery, we're not like the Catholics. It's not father such and such and everyone is brother. It's everyone's father, which means we're all called on to be examples to each other and to be fathers to each other. Now the abbot or whatever is the senior, but we looked at Elder Emilio Nos. He wrote a book called The Authentic Seal, which has an excellent section where it talks about the abbot is supposed to lead by example. He is supposed to be the kindly father, and also the one who enforces, the order. And what can the lay people learn from that? Well, most lay people are in families as well, and I think fathers in regular families would be well served to look at how the monastic fathers treat each other. Because somebody told me a long time ago, it's probably hackneyed by now, but we don't raise children; we raise adults, and most of the time we're dealing with our offspring is as adults, God willing. So I think that how the lay people, can learn is to observe. And I tell people, they ask, what do you do in the monastery all day? And I'm like, well, we do everything that everyone else does. We have to cook and clean and paint and all those kind of things. And on top of that, we have, a couple hours of services a day, depending on the monastery. So that's the goal is to try to balance all these things. Particularly during Lent. Now here, I don't have that many people here, so we're not able to do a full cycle. But our monastery in Long Island during the first week, it's 6 hours of church a day, and on those days you still have to do everything else. So somebody said that they looked at monasteries like people look at the military in one sense, as we're people, we have the opportunity. God has blessed us and given us the opportunity to do everything. Because the people support us, so we don't have to have jobs in the world. So we're able to spend our time in prayer, which is like a recapturing of Eden.
Right. And, I feel like even though it is true that there is a domestic aspect to life in a monastery where, there's cooking, there's cleaning, there's hospitality to visitors and, such and such, something really special about that maybe people can kind of pull from is the unbroken prayer that goes along with those tasks. And it's like, yeah, I remember you probably remember this, the 60 Minutes documentary they did on Manatos.
Yes,
where
absolutely.
It's like they like zoom in on the one monk painting the icona, and it's like you just see his lips moving, Kyrie su Christe eleison, like Kyrie, like over and over. So and my mother tells me the same thing. God bless her, she's fantastic about how she's vacuuming, how she's cooking, whatever. And she's like, I'm praying all day. And I feel like that would help a lot of people if they institute.
Absolutely. Prayer gives focus to everything we do. And in a monastery, it's more obvious that everything we're doing in the house of God. So when we're mopping the floor or, taking out the garbage or whatever, it gives a sense of purpose. But the thing is, people in the world have that same purpose. It's just, it gets lost in the shuffle. St. Maximus, the confessor, says, all things that are necessary are good. And so that means everything that's necessary that we have to do is you're working for the glory of God. And so people in the world, when they come to the monastery, I think that's an opportunity for them to see that that's precisely what they can do in their life. Is everything has this purpose, everything has this focus. And prayer, again, sometimes when I visit places, I visit my mother or something like that. And of course I pray myself, but not having access, once you get used to the daily services being matins and vespers and whatever, you feel like something is sort of wrong if you're not doing that. It feels like the world is like missing its bookends or its structure. And I think that I've been very blessed to have been able to visit monasteries overseas, and it's a great opportunity for us to see. We went to visit this monastery in Greece. Me and now Father Vasilios, he was a novice then. We went to visit, and the abbot wasn't there, so it was like mostly the young monks. We sat down and talked, and they were asking, like, what it's like to be a monk in America. This, how could you possibly do this? And they were sort of fascinated with our lives, and we felt like we were going to the home office, and we were more interested in what they had to teach us. So I think the important thing is just as you can be a Christian anywhere, you can be a monk anywhere. And what the important thing to remember is we all have exactly the same goal. The monk and the married person have the same goal. We're both trying to be Christians. Both of our goal is theosis through prayer. And that's everyone's obligation, not just.
And the supplementality just might be different. Some people have a husband and wife. Other people have their brethren in the monastery.
Right. Well, you know the story. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows the story that St. Anthony had it revealed to him, and he's the great monk, he's the greatest monk. He had it revealed to him there was a man living in Alexandria who was his spiritual equal, and he was married, he was a cobbler. And he gave, it says in the Desert Fathers, it says a third of his money he gave to the poor, a third he gave to the church, a third he lived on, and he sang with the angels. And that was a way to remind St. Anthony that, this can be done anywhere. Now, I think the church would say it's a little bit more difficult in the world, in many ways. But there are consolations in the world. But I think it's important for lay people to realize we have to, if you're a lay person, your model that you should emulate is not just the guy next door. It should be like someone like John of Kronstadt, or one of these like married saints that was really, really, committed to it.
For sure. And I really like that thing you said, the quote about how everything that is necessary is good. And I feel like that is representative of God's love towards order. And
absolutely.
And we're seeing a lot of this same love of order bringing people into the church. In the past couple of years, has this been this wave, this phenomenon of young men coming into the church, a lot
absolutely.
of which are discerning monasticism, maybe a little hastily, but if that's their calling, God bless them. What would be tell me.
I think I was once a young hot-headed convert, so I have and a male, obviously. I have a little I feel defensive of them because, oftentimes when people come to church, they'll point out, well, this is how little old ladies pray. And, little old ladies are very important in the church. And indeed they are. Absolutely. But the church also has to deal with, young men, young who are not old ladies. And they have this drive and they have this, desire.
Vigor.
And vigor. And we should temper it, but not dampen it. And so anyone who comes in and, I always encourage people, now being most of them who, talk about being a monk, that often, they meet a girl or whatever, and that often goes away because monastic life is in America, it's not physically difficult in most cases as it would be, in the ancient world. It is emotionally difficult because you are alone. And even if you're in a bunch of people, you're alone, monachos, you're by yourself. And I think a lot of people God said, it's not good for man to be alone. St. Athanasius tells us to be fully human, we have to go beyond the merely human. So the monastic life, which the fathers will call the supermundane life, the angelic life, it's unnatural on the positive side, not on the negative side. And that's why it's not called for everybody. But it's the biggest challenge that a lot of the young men who are coming in and are interested in monastic life particularly are the most underrated virtue probably in the world, but certainly in Orthodoxy, is obedience. You got to do what someone else tells you to do for a long time. Many, many years. I'll oftentimes, little kids will come up because I very frequently have, fancy jeweled crosses or whatever. And they say, how do you get that? I'm like,
takes a while.
You got to be obedient to someone else for 20 years, at least. And the other virtue that I think is obviously not given to young men in many ways is patience. Things take time. And, people will come to a monastery and I tell them, they'll see the difficulties in it. And you say, this is not necessarily the monastery you're going to die in. Monastic life, I never planned on being in Florida. This is where I am now. And who knows, if I live long enough, I may be in California or something like that. And it's once you realize you're committed to the church and you're committed to the monastic state and you're committed to the brotherhood.
Right. I agree. And for the people that it does inevitably become appropriate for, what would be your advice to anybody discerning monasticism and what qualities or attributes would assist them, I guess, in either a prerequisite way or when they eventually get to that would be helpful to them?
I think one of the most important things, most people should spend some time in a parish. And if you do not love prayer, and specifically, if you do not love liturgical prayer, you're not going to be happy in a monastery. You have to love the liturgy. You have to love the services, because that's everything else we do is so that we can do that. That's our justification. That's why we exist. And I think the important thing to do is be realistic as well. People will overly romanticize monasticism. Most monasteries, very few of us are Seraphim of Sarov or Elder of Frem. Very few of us are that. Most of us are fallible human beings who are struggling, some days better, some days worse. And oftentimes the temptation people have coming into the church is to be judgmental. And there are extreme statements in the Philokalia that I remember reading when I was a young man. It says, if you see your spiritual father fornicating in front of you, don't judge him. And that sounds crazy because it's a little hyperbolic. But the stress is you're not there to judge. You're there to emulate. Saint Simeon the theologian says, when your spiritual father speaks, compare what he teaches to the Holy Fathers. That which is good, you keep, and that which is not good, you let go away. So I think that that's a really important thing. But then people should visit monasteries. But I would advise people not to, because what happens is people will go monastery hopping like it's some kind of
like it's a tour. Like it's yeah,
right. And we got to remember that Saint Benedict says the worst kind of monk is what's called the gyroveg, the monk who goes from place to place, traveling around. So what people should do is go to a monastery, spend some time there, a couple weeks, a month, because it's like dating. You don't get to know somebody the first day. And when people come people will come on the weekend for 72 hours, they're not getting a real sense of what it's like to be in a monastery, because it's being there when nothing is going on, when the monks are just focusing on their monastic life. That's when you get a sense of it. And you also have to have a sense of monasticism is all day, every day. It's all day, every day. And there's a lot of people. I've been a monk for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of people come with great enthusiasm. But, St. Paul says, he who endures to the end shall be saved. I actually had an encounter we had several years ago, now many years ago, Elder Pavlos of Sinai. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Mm-mm.
Very holy man. He was the Yeranda of Mount Sinai Monastery, St. Catherine's. And he was visiting New York. That was a nice thing about being in New York. A lot of people would visit. And so we invited him to our monastery, and he came and he gave a conversation or a little talk, mostly Greek people. He didn't speak much English, but I had to introduce him, and I was very intimidated. He's the real deal, and I'm some kid. And I say, this is Elder Pavlos, and I listed all of his degrees and, all this kind of stuff. And he looked at me and he said in English, he says, that's all true, but have I done anything? Which I think was extremely powerful, because it was like I listed all of his external qualifications, but he was saying, have I done it? Have I done anything? Have I really, stripped away the passions? Have I really made myself in a situation where I'm being deified? And I think that was a very, very powerful moment for me, because that's a reminder. You can get all the swag and get all the hats and get all that stuff. And I'm not dismissive or disrespectful. They represent something. The church has to have order. But if you don't do the work, it's like being a general in the army and you can't shoot a rifle. What's the point?
Exactly. And, on the topic of the relationship between people and the monasteries they visit, what purpose do monasteries actually serve in the spiritual lives of the laity? And what does a healthy and non-abusive on the side of the laity towards the monasteries relationship look like between the layperson and a monastery?
Well, the simple answer is also the actual answer. It's we pray for the world. We pray for the church. We're in a circumstance where, because we are supported by the people, when we talk about giving to the poor, when you're giving to a monastery, giving to the poor, well, they give us a lot, so we don't seem poor, but we're able to pray for every day, several times a day. We're able to pray for the people. That's our greatest gift, is prayer. Now, in addition to that, and that has to be underlined, that's the main thing, and it also depends on the monasteries. You said you were at some of the Ephraimite monasteries. They're very big. Some of the monasteries, this one I have here, is very small. So each of them have like different functions. But one of the functions is spiritual counsel. I mean, oftentimes people will come to a monastery and go to confession because the monk is able to be more disinterested. I don't mean that as uninterested, but less partial than maybe a married priest might be. Young people, oftentimes, like some of the monasteries we've been in, young men would come and spend the summer. And so we have an opportunity to also teach. It's teaching and preaching and prayer. And the lay people, I mean, we appreciate the lay people always, wherever we are. It's not, if there's an abusive relationship between the lay people and the monks, it's the monks' fault, not theirs. The monastery has to set boundaries. It has to set and tell the people what you're going to do. When I took over a monastery, Holy Cross, there were like people, they were used to, some people would like come at like 10 o'clock at night, and whatever. And they were very enthusiastic, but I had to say, no, these are the rules. And this is a monastery, and we come through the door. This is the way we have to behave. And
your house is your house. Yeah.
Our house is our house. And here at this very small place we're establishing now, because the people who are coming to church here, they don't know monastic customs. When I first put the throne in, because there's a throne for the abbot, I'm not able to be in it because I'm serving as priest, but some people were like sitting in it, and you have to explain. They don't know. You have to kindly explain things. So I think that's the important thing, because
that had to be at least a little funny the first time you saw it.
It was because I was coming out for a sensing, and I saw the person there, and I just I'm like, no, because you're used to certain things.
I did that on accident with a bishop's throne when I was like 5. So I mean,
see, but a little boy sitting on the throne, that's no problem. They do that all the time.
Yeah, and
so I think that's the key, and I've, in this circumstance here, most of Rokor parishes are Russian speaking, and so I've been helping the local priests with catechesis for English speakers. So that's another thing a monastery can do, is teaching.
Very cool. And it's, forgive me if I'm incorrect, but it's my impression of you that you are well-traveled and well-acquainted with a multitude of clergy and holy people. So who are some of the saintly people that you've met in your life, and what impact did they leave on you?
I alluded before to Elder Pavlos, and I was extremely impressed with him, and I'm sure he's a saint. There's no question about it. When you first meet a saint, I think we have an impression that they're going to be sort of, glowing or intimidating or something like that. What struck me about Elder Pavlos was he was just so normal in the positive sense of that term. And he made everyone who was near him comfortable. You felt like you wanted to be in his presence. He was not affected in any way. Oftentimes converts, even convert clergy, we can behave like in an affected way that is like, just people need to normal up a little bit. But I was really, really impressed with him. And he told a story that I've told 1,000 times before. I preached it many, many times, because I think for Christians in America, converts particularly, but all Christians in America, in the Anglosphere, I think this is a very valuable lesson. He told a story that on Mount Sinai, it's very, very hot. It's miserable. I've been to Sinai. It's 100 degrees in the shade. And he said when the Greeks first came there to be monks, they couldn't do their normal ascetic things, prostrations or whatever. or even serious fasting, because they would die. You try to do 100 prostrations in 102-degree weather, you're just going to die. So the monks got together and they said, well, we have to be ascetic. We have to do ascetic things. What should we do? And they came up with the notion of the asceticism of non-judgment. And think about that. Underline that. This is very, very valuable for particularly for people in the world. And we asked, what is that? And he gave an example. He said there was a monk at the monastery, and he went into another monk's room. And the room was like in perfect order. Everything was in its place. And when he was telling this story, he looked over at the monks and he said, "We know, fathers, this is unusual." The monks are rolling up. And he said the monk went in and he looked and he said, "Oh, Father such and such, his mind is like heaven. Everything is in perfect order. God bless Father such and such." And he didn't judge it. So then he went to the next room, and it was disordered, books here and candles there. And he said, "Oh, Father is so busy with the spiritual life, he has no time for things of this world." So he didn't judge him either. And then the point is, use your energy when you interact with each other to not judge. And it sounds sort of a little cutesy, but it's really, really helpful. It's also much more difficult than people might realize. And that's an internal asceticism. That's a mental asceticism. And I've learned a little bit my time, and the fathers say it, and we try to get around it, but controlling thoughts, this is the key. If you can control thoughts, don't worry about anything else. So if we practice this asceticism of non-judgment and control our thoughts, I imagine in my mind, like thoughts, it's like you're walking through this house, and there's certain hallways and certain doors. You go in there, it's going to be bad. So you just have to learn to shut the door. And I think in the internet generation that we live in, I think that's one of the great temptations, because that describes like how people are scrolling. When you're a priest, that's the big thing. People say, "Oh, I was scrolling on the internet and I saw this, 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 and this," and the point is, very few times are the scrolling achieve anything beneficial. And I don't mean to undermine people who, like yourself, who are doing things on the internet. It's important. We have to be in every corner of the universe. But I think that notion of controlling your mind, calming yourself down, and of course, the way to do this is the Jesus prayer, is the prayer of the heart. Everybody, I see on your wall, you have many prayer ropes.
Oh yeah, I have one hanging up for every icon. I just started wearing them in case I meet somebody that needs one, and I'll just give them.
I do the same thing. Yeah. I do the same thing, and it's really critical. I mean, when a monk is made a stavrophore, a great schema monk, in the ritual, one of the things that the tantring, whether he's a bishop or abbot, does is he gives the prayer rope, and he says, "Take the sword of the Spirit." And we have this invincible sword that will defeat our enemies always. But the problem is we just don't use it. We leave it, a sword can't do anything if we just leave it on the table. So that's the important thing, is to pick up and to fight. I don't remember what the question was.
The spiritual machine gun, as Aspasios put it. And yeah, that's why you wear it on the left side of your belt, because that's where you put the sword, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's something where, Metropolitan Callisto said, he very frequently regretted speaking. He never regretted saying a prayer, which I think is, important for us to realize. It is.
And on the topic of the spiritual warfare, what passions do you see people dealing with most commonly today? And what is the cure to these growing spiritual illnesses, whether they be on, a societal or an individual level?
Well, I mean, I think the great passion that mankind has faced always, the most immediate and obvious one, is lust. A desire, for material things, whatever that is, sexual or food or drugs or whatever. That's the great one that people have to fight. And I think, and that's why we have the various ascetic practices that assist us with that. But I think what I said before is really critical. What helps with that is fighting in your mind. And what I think we have the great passion, is a desire. I like to think of the mind as like it's like territory, right? It's like a kingdom, and our job is to turn it all over to God. But we keep this little corner, right? Sometimes it's more than a little corner. And in that little corner, that's where all the thorns and the thistles and everything grows. And unless we make an effort, we have to be willing to even, sometimes we won't even decide. We're not trying to give it up. We're just trying to justify what our particular passions are. Well, I do this, but I don't do that. And this is going to be very hollow defense on the dread judgment day. And I think the most powerful thing, I've had some health problems over my life. And one of the most powerful things, and is helpful, is remembrance of death. Is remembrance of death. Now, Orthodoxy is not a dour, sad religion because death is not the end. But we have to remember, oftentimes in the services, repeatedly, it talks about we are wandering through the fair ground of this life. And it comes to an end. And that's one of the reasons during Lent, we're constantly reminded that this life comes to an end and it has a very specific purpose. I was reading Gregory Palamas today in his triads. The purpose of this life is to be deified. So it's not God is depriving us of life. He wants to give us more life, greater life. But he's telling us that we have to remove from that garden those things that will destroy us. And the problem is in the world, I think everyone in every age always has the same problems. The problem is the world today, the world superstructure, infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, so justifies. They have professors and books or whatever justifying every foul and evil thing. So that if you're tempted, you can just go, well, Professor such and such says this horrible thing that I do is actually natural and good.
Look what the experts say, right?
Look what the experts say. Trust the science, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not anti-science, but as Palamas, St. Gregory talks about when he makes a decision or makes a distinction between science in his day and theology, and he says science can only bring us so far. He describes secular science or profane science in his day, what a pagan science, as like a deadly snake that first you have to kill and drain the poison out, and then you can use it. And for most of us, maybe just avoid the snake entirely if you can. But if you're going to do it, it's that effort. So I think we have to be careful. Our day is difficult and has problems or whatever, but I think we all have to believe, based on the parable of the 11th hour, that everyone is placed where they need to be best for their salvation. So you were placed here in this time. I was placed here in this time because that's the best place for us to earn salvation. So we can sort of like hearken back to Byzantium or Holy Russia or all these things. God chose to put us elsewhere. So if we're trying to focus on those things and not focus on where God has put us, we're making a big mistake.
Right. And he'll give us everything we need to fight in the time and the place we are.
Everything we need. And also the implication is from, I think Elder Paisius said this. I know some of the other Greek elders, modern Greek elders said it. Certainly it's implied in the 11th hour. We're not as much as expected of us. Just because. That doesn't mean we should be slack. That means if we're making 100% effort, we're not going to be like, probably the early fathers. Although we have like examples of people in modern times who were amazingly advanced spiritually. St. John Maximovich, St. Paisius, St. Porphyrius. All these people were able to really manifest in like a first century way. The difference between St. John Maximovich and St. Nicholas is just the time they lived. And they're both like saints of the same caliber, which I think, and I think it was St. Herman, maybe it's St. Seraphim. But one of them said, what separates us from the apostles of old? And his answer was a firm resolve. A firm resolve. We don't do those things primarily because we don't want to do them. we spend our time justifying why we don't have to be holy and do those things that we need to do.
I think that's really striking, because one of the best books I read in my life was In Praise of Paul by St. John Chrysostom, and how he talks about, if St. John the Baptist dealt with one Herod, St. Paul dealt with 30 every day, and how just his holiness was a representation of his sheer willpower to do what is right for the people that he's ministering to. And I mean, I know this might sound like a weird question, but like, where's the fire gone? Where's the fight in us? What happened over the past couple centuries, or whatever the case may be?
That's an interesting question. And I think if we look, I think there is a not a bad tendency for modern Orthodox to be a little humble, in that we look around and we're not really impressed with what were our product, as it were. But if we look, for example, some of the Greek elders and some of the quality of them are in the 20th century, we produced some really high caliber, amazing saints. And we have that capacity. It's just, one, we're dealing with a world that is, I think we can say, it's objectively worse. I think that's the implication from Scripture, that things are, orthodoxy is not at its highest watermark right now. It goes up and down. Right now we have a lot of problems. But also, I think we can look at the recent saints as just telling us that we really have no excuse, except that it's like we're going into this, this mall, and we're just more interested in all the worldly things. I saw something saying that the amount of imagery presented to a modern person is vastly over what an ancient person would have seen. It would have been in their area. They would have seen it. Now we're sort of exposed. So I think the temptation is just to be overwhelmed. And I think when people are overwhelmed, they seek solace in the same things, wine, women, and song. They don't want to think about things, so they turn their mind elsewhere. But again, I think we can never say we can't do it. I think it's Saint Simeon. Yes, it's Saint Simeon, the theologian, that says, when we say that we cannot do what the fathers of old did, that we don't fall into one heresy, we fall into all of them.
Oh.
He calls it the heresy of pusillanimity. And I think that's really important. So and I think it's just because I'm not doing it, or you're not doing it, or we're not, at our greatest potential, that doesn't mean we shouldn't encourage other people. One of the back when I was on the internet more, and I would get criticism because I would present, statements from the fathers, heavy stuff, the serious stuff, St. Maximus, St. Dionysius, St. Gregory of Palamas. And one of the things that some of the more liberal people would say, we shouldn't, people aren't ready for that. You shouldn't put that out. They should be, you should keep things, more simple. And I understand that. That's a legitimate argument on one level. But St. Maximus says, don't fail to tell the whole truth. I'm paraphrasing. Because of your own sins. Because then you commit a double sin. You have not been worthy in the first place, and secondarily, you haven't communicated the truth. So my thinking was, put it out there. It's like throwing a seed out. And most people, maybe they'll get it, maybe they won't. But I like to think, in my little time doing that, I at least a couple of people I've encouraged to read the fathers. Not me, but the fathers, particularly Maximus. I have a catechumen. He's an adult. He's in his 40s. And I haven't catechized anyone in a long time. So I had him read St. Maximus. And he's like, he's going to name his child Maximus. So I feel like I've put it on to the next generation.
Right. And well, to put it in fishing terms, can't catch any fish, you don't throw the line out. So
right. And and who am I to say, who am I to say what you know and what you don't know? And people say, well, you should keep away all the Bible because Holy Scripture is very difficult. I mean, people who read it produce one religion a week. So it's one of those things where...
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something like that, a new religion every week. A new Christian religion.
Yeah, new denomination, like, is made, like, every 3 days or whatever it is. It's like,
Yeah.
I've heard of that before, so...
It's insane.
Yeah, no joke. Well, on the topic of fighting the passions, and, answer to this to whatever capacity you can or are comfortable with, what methods do you primarily utilize that others can also use to fight against the passions in a world so full of subliminal temptation and messaging and all this?
Well, I mean, obviously the ones that the church always recommends and insists are very helpful. Fasting, and even if you can't do extreme fasting, fasting is very helpful. Everyone out there needs to be in church whenever the doors open. That's going to be tremendously helpful. But I think for our generation, people of our time, since so much garbage is going into our mind, and we don't forget things, we have to balance it. And I recommend to all my spiritual children, spiritual reading. You have to read. You have to read spiritually edifying things every day. And that's, if you're not reminded of what, I tell all my spiritual children, when you say your prayers in the morning, you're reminding yourself that you're a Christian and you have a mission. It's like the policemen. They go in and the police officer says, here, we're going to do this, this, and this. It sets the day. And then in the course of your day, you have to do spiritual reading in addition to your prayers. But if people are just praying and not reading, they're not going to, your reason and your nous are connected. If we think of the nous as the lens by which the light comes in, the reason is clouded with dark thoughts, and it's like gunk that gets on the lens. And spiritual reading and prayer helps us scrape the lens so that the truth can come through. So what I do, I every day I read from the Philokalia. And for converts, I always tell them you should reread the books that you read at the beginning of your Orthodox life that encouraged you to become Orthodox, because that sort of talk about the fire, that sort of re-engages people. And then again, when learning to control your thoughts, not giving rein to controlling your thoughts. And one of the most important ways to help control your thoughts is keeping your mouth shut. People just want to talk and talk and talk like I'm doing now. Don't worry, I'll make up.
Well, no, per my chosen hobby, I'm not doing great in that either. All right, I do.
Right.
So
right, but I'm, Saint Maximus says if you're doing it for a good purpose, you can do it.
Sweet.
Right, but I think that spiritual reading is the key, because I think a lot of people come into the church and they have sort of a pietistic notion, and I have to do something. I'll get 27 icons and all these kind of things, and which is fine. No, there's nothing wrong. I mean, I have a zillion icons too. But
you're preaching to the choir.
No, but that's part of part of the meal. That's part of the menu. But the other part of the menu is transforming your reason, particularly converts. But let's face it, most ethnic Orthodox are in very similar circumstance.
Oh, for sure.
Your mind has been warped by the world, and you have to unwarp it. And the only way to unwarp it is spiritual reading. This is in one of the, I think it's Peter of Damascus talks about this. And one of the things it says in the Desert Fathers is, it takes just as long to fill a hole as it does to dig it. So we have to be patient, because we spend a lot of time warping our mind through all kinds of things. And I don't mean just necessarily, obviously evil things, but just, a lot of people have unexamined, unorthodox thoughts. We see this, and I'm not going to go into any detail, but we see this in the political arena. People are making political decisions that are not in any way informed by Christianity or their Orthodox faith. And they have a tendency, well, that's a different thing. I can believe whatever I want here. We see this on the left and on the right. It's not true. everything we do has to be informed by our orthodox understanding of things. And people will say to me, well, I'll say, you read this, read this, read this. And they're like, well, you're a monk. You have time to do all that. Aside from not being true, everyone has time to do these things. If we give up, Netflix and people will go to a ball game or whatever. I don't know a lot about sports, but that's like a couple hours right there. I used to be a movie theater manager. That's 2 hours right there. And if people will spend an hour a day reading in an effort to transform their mind with that thought that I have to fix this, this mind of mine, which I've destroyed. I mean, in the Compline prayer, we talk about, I've wholly destroyed my mind. I've wholly destroyed my soul, which is, again, extreme, but it's, we're supposed to read that every day, which means we have to, do that.
And in a sense, it's not too much of an exaggeration for a lot of people. And I feel like getting that fire going for people to be equally as passionate about calling upon Christ to fix them as they were about destroying themselves is important, if not more so. They need to be motivated to get to the point.
That's one of the prayers that actually says, grant me that I may worship thee as I once served Satan himself, which is true. When we're doing evil, we have all the energy in the world. People, they'll complain, oh, church is 45 minutes, but, they'll stay out, drinking and dancing, all night. And that's because they find that fun, which is fine. But the challenge is we have to derive joy from our spiritual efforts. And I think part of our negative influence from the West is a Western religion is that the religion is dour and depressing. And we have to do it like taking medicine, but it's really not fun, quote unquote.
And hollow if it's not orthodoxy, if we're going to be frank about it.
Right. Elder Moses, which I didn't get to, was the other holy man that I met. He came to America. And Elder Moses had been the disciple of St. Paisius. And he's lived with him like 20 years. He had an opportunity, and we were able to talk to him. And he was very, 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 very impressive. And he's very different from Elder Pavlos. He was this big man, sort of in dour seeming, but again, he radiated that same sort of normality and love. And he told us this story that because he was a little bit more on that sort of side of things, and he was living in the mesquite with Saint Paisius, and he saw Saint Paisius standing in the middle of the mesquite, and he's just smiling broadly, And so Elder Moses says to him, he says, "What are you so happy about?" And St. Paisius says to him, he says, "I have so much joy, I feel like I'm going to explode." Why did he have so much joy? Because he wasn't sinning. If we think about it, it's the sin that doesn't give us joy. The guilt and shame, whatever, that's what makes us miserable. He didn't have that. So he felt like he was going to explode. And I remember telling that to one interested person in Orthodox. Well, oh, that's not right. I'm like, no, that's right. That's absolutely right. If we achieve, that state where we're with God, there's nothing but joy.
Yeah. I mean, not having ankle weights attached to you is better than having ankle weights attached to you. So not being in a state of sin is better than being in a state of sin 10 days out of 10. So.
But that's, if we think about it, the world has been the devil's very successful. He's convinced us that Satan is fun and God is boring. When the reality is Satan wants to destroy us. He hates us. And God wants us to live. And I think if we remember that, particularly when we're dealing with things in the world, I think that gives us the strength.
Yeah. And speaking of the unfortunate success of the devil, another part of his war against our souls has been convincing people of the non-existence of God. And it's a temptation that controls those who are not in the faith on a consistent level and those in the faith in maybe a less consistent level. But what is the appropriate way to battle the temptation of not believing in the existence of God, and how can we maybe help pull other people out of that if we can do anything out, whatever the case
Well,
might be.
I think that's like the root of all temptation. The root of all temptation is this all real? Is this just, is this just a, some kind of trick? And I think, I mean, for me, um, the combination of reading the Holy Fathers and looking at creation and seeing the personality in creation. The other day, this lizard came in the house. It was a Florida problem.
I like
And
lizards, so.
yeah, no, I do too. I'll send you a picture, but he was like 3 feet long. And in addition to being a little startled, it was also, what a beautiful, absolutely beautiful creature. And there's the same origin is birds and whatever. There's a guy by the name of David Berlinski. He's a Jewish, maybe he's a Christian, I don't know what he is, but he's a mathematician. And he wrote on the issue of evolution. And his point, he sort of proved mathematically that it is impossible. It's impossible. The world has not existed by their stretch long enough for these things to happen. So I think part of it is, like I said before, is sort of undoing some of the natural assumptions that we make as modern people, and realizing that human beings have always understood there's something higher than them. And even people today, even though they may say they're atheists, they still have some sense, why be just? Why be good? Why do all these things if there's no consequence? Everyone feels there is a consequence. But I think the other key is prayer, is canonical and didactic prayer. I mean, there's obviously that, and there's the Jesus prayer, but I think we have to read the prayers of the church, prayer books or whatever, which tell us, they teach us. God knows all these things. They teach us how the way we're supposed to think, and that, I mean, I think that's the great challenge. That's the root. They say, some of the fathers say, the root of all sin is atheism, is not believing. So, and I think everyone to some degree is tempted by it. But also part of the problems in the modern world is that it's also, they want there not to be a God, because then they want to do whatever they want to do. And they feel like, well, I can be whatever I want to be if there's no God to judge me. But I think they all know it's a pretty weak answer.
Yeah, it's really, you'll be really hard pressed to find a convincing argument that Jesus Christ is not the Son of God. It's like, it's
right. It's
so.
I mean, I came to the church through reason. I mean, it was and you look at all the religions of the world, you look at earth and people on it, and to deduce that somehow, and this is what the atheists teach, that essentially everyone prior to them has been insane, mentally ill, is what they teach. So all the most beautiful things that have ever been produced in the world, the greatest poetry, the greatest architecture, the greatest paint, everything was produced by insane people. And then this ugly, hideous modern world was produced by people that are not mentally ill. Well, that's absurd on the face of it.
Pride does something to people, I'll tell you. Huh?
It does. I mean, C.S. Lewis talks about that. He says you can be an atheist, but then you have to part company with all the greatest people and greatest things that have ever existed. And and again, they don't really live. Most people don't really live like there's no God. They don't. If somebody said, what would you do if there's no God? I'd sell crack. I mean, you do something like that. Why not? Because, there's no right or wrong. But, and most people are not doing that. Most people are living these like little small lives, but they talk and they say they don't believe. But most people, like in airports and people come up and talk to me, most people seem to believe in something. So I think it's the responsibility of the Orthodox to provide a good example. My mother converted to Orthodoxy before she died, and she told me she converted to Orthodoxy because I became Orthodox, and she looked at her children. It's like, okay, he seems like he knows what he's doing. I mean, nothing, good thing she didn't know me completely, but that's the important thing. And people say, what can I do to bring my family or my friends or whatever into Orthodoxy? And one of the things is people need to. I've found a lot of people are my relative will never convert. They just want to understand it, which that's sort of implying that the Holy Spirit has limits. It's not. They're not going to convert because what we say. They're going to convert by when people see a change in us. And if we live the life and do what we're supposed to do, that will bring people to the church. That's what Saint Seraphim of Sarov said. Acquired the spirit of peace, and thousands will
souls will be saved. Yeah.
So that's our challenge.
And the reason a lot of people may be atheists might be from a rational perspective, and some people become like that due to spiritual ascesis, spiritual dormition. But in the Orthodox Church, it seems that sometimes we may have the opposite problem, like a misdirected zealousy in some ways. So, with many Orthodox Christians being divided by theological opinion and ecclesiastical politics, what steps can individuals take to encourage love and peace and unity amongst the faithful without compromising the dogmas of our orthodoxy? Because I think you've noticed that we're in a little bit of a debate club, kind of a verbal warfare.
Well, yeah, until recently, I was a participant in it, and I'm not. I just got tired of the process. It's
I don't blame you. It's exhausting.
It's a young man's job, I have to say. And I think people. I think what we have to do is we have to put our money where our mouth is. I've had a lot of people who knew me from online, and then when they met me in person, they're like, "Oh, you're much nicer than I would have thought you would have been." And that's the nature of online. That's particularly text online. There are some serious issues that divide us. There are real theological issues, and those cannot be whisked away, because if we do that, there's no more church. The theology of the church is critical, but we can defend that in a way that is kind and loving and not necessarily hostile. Now, the mentality of some people is such that anyone who disagrees with me hates me. That's not true. That's not so. On some cases, you cannot win. So with those people, it's best to move on. And
it's just hard to live like that.
It's hard to live like that. And the thing is, when we stress the theology and the theological terms, we should never forget in the course of that to stress love, the importance of love, the critical nature of love, how love is central to what we believe, and that when we love somebody or something, we have to give them the truth. And it's like if you had a doctor, we have a doctor, let's say he's the nicest doctor in the world, and people come to him and they're smoking and they have all sorts of, and he never says don't smoke because he doesn't want to offend people, but smoking gives them cancer. So we have to communicate in such a way by basically saying this is the truth, and we want to give the truth because we want people to be saved. We show respect for the Holy Fathers. They're not the holy professors. They're not the holy teachers. They're the Holy Fathers. They're our fathers. We are their children. So we show respect for them by not assuming that what they're writing is nonsense. I mean, that's the modern academic notion. It's like, well, Saint such and such wrote this because, no, he wrote it because it was true. And he wrote it, he didn't have a typewriter and things like we do. He was like in a cave somewhere with an oil lamp writing something down because he felt that it was important for us to know. And it's important for us to know because we have to, like I said, we have to every day, we have to emulate Christ. We have to emulate what the church teaches. If we don't know what it is, love without truth is just fornication. We have to have love plus truth. That's marriage. And so what is people, we should not the practical advice is don't get into heated back and back theological arguments with people in a public arena, because it's just a justification for people who hate the church anyway to say, look at them about these things. And sometimes they're right. This is the problem. Sometimes they're exactly right. So the important thing is, if we do have arguments or we want to discuss something, a particular thing, it should be done in like a small, and then there's understanding that in some areas there is room for discussion. There are certain theological. I'm very convinced of my theological positions on things, but there are people who I respect who have different theological positions. So if we focus on what's essential, I have a good friend. He's a priest, and he's on sort of the liberal side of things. And we talk about things, and I say my opinion. He says his opinion, but he loves the church. I know he loves the church, and I know he loves the liturgy, and I know he loves the theology. But people have different opinions. I think he's wrong.
Doesn't mean you hate him.
Doesn't mean I hate him, and don't hate anybody. Saint Maximus also says, if you cannot love everybody, at least don't hate anyone. That's how practical is that. And this is a man who was involved in theological controversy every minute of every day for 40 years, most of his life. So you can tell when he says that, he's saying that from a sense of, don't hate anybody. He also says, and I think it's a very powerful thing, he says, do not disregard spiritual love, for many it's the only means of salvation.
Wow. You've talked about a lot of saints and their quotes and what their lives and teachings mean to you. So what lives and teachings of the saints would you say help you the most in your work and your spiritual struggles?
I find the life and writings of Saint Maximus. My name is Maximus, so this seems sort of like
convenient,
a little self-serving. But I love, people used to congratulate me on the Feast of Saint Maximus before I was Maximus. I think his life, his teachings, in the midst of a tremendously difficult, you can tell from reading his writings, he wanted to write about like theology and like biblical commentary and things like that. That's what he wanted to do. And his stuff on that is so beautiful. But he was called, because of the circumstances, in like very, very intense partisan battle over a subject, a heresy that we've almost forgotten: monothelitism. It's one of those that sort of went by the wayside. He gave his life struggling because he understood early on when it came out, when monothelitism came out, he's like, yeah, maybe that. But then once he realized it damaged the theological understanding of who Christ is, and if we don't know who Christ is, we can't be Christians.
Just for context, what is that heresy?
Okay, monothelitism was that, there was originally monophysitism, right? One nature. And then they were trying to come up with these artificial solutions to get the Monophysites and the Orthodox back together. And so monothelitism was the notion that, okay, there's two natures, but there's one will, right? Feel it. And there was also monoenergism. There's a bunch of them. And so that came out, and the emperor, this sounds very modern, the emperor issued a document called the Ecthesis. And he said, nobody's to talk about this subject. Nobody talks about this, because he wanted to keep peace. But early on, St. Maximus considered it. It's like, okay, what? And then when he realized, he's like, no, this is bad. And he spent the rest of his days championing the understanding that Christ has to be fully human and fully divine. If he's not, his humanity only lacks sin, which is not essential to human. And so his humanity cannot lack energy, it cannot lack will, it cannot lack any of these things. And in the midst of this extremely busy life, right, We complain about we got to travel here and there. He traveled all over the world by boat. When traveling, half the people might, or a good chunk of the people may have died. And he went as far as, Rome and all these various other places. But in the midst, he never lost his center. He never lost his peace. He never lost his theological understanding. And he was able to be a monk and present spiritual truth everywhere he went. And at the end of the day, if you read the trial of St. Maximus, it's one, he's very feisty, but also it's what they did to him and how they treated him is just unbelievable. He it would have been easier for him physically for them to have killed him, but they didn't want to make a murder. They knew that. So they didn't accuse him of theological problems. They accused him of being a traitor, that's more sort of ugly. And the end result was, they talk about when he was brought through the streets, the people spit on him to the point that he was like sopping wet from spit from people. And then they put him in a cart and they drove him east until he died, actually, in the modern day Republic of Georgia. So if you look from Constantinople to Georgia in a cart for an 82-year-old man, how he suffered. And they just kept driving him east until he died. He is, I think, one of the greats, and his example is overwhelming. We don't have a lot of examples of his personal piety or his miracles. We know they existed, but I think it's someone, because he's someone we can sort of transport to any age. He's remarkably, and I use this word advisedly, he's remarkably modern in the sense of he's a global figure. He's all over the place. He's constantly producing content, as we would say today, and never loses his center. And when you pick up something, he also had a sense, when you read St. Maximus, you have a sense that he knew, without being arrogant, he knew he was important. He knew his writings were important, and he knew he was writing for the ages.
And he was smart. He was very smart.
I would contend, and I think Maximus Constas, Father Maximus Constas, another Maximus, writes in one of his books that he's the greatest mind of the Orthodox Church. And he also says something that I've quoted to people, and they didn't like it. You really can't understand Orthodoxy without the lens of Maximus. People are like, what? It's true, and we forget he's 662 is when he reposed. Our understanding of Orthodoxy comes through that lens. That's really very important. So he is my favorite saint. Also, Saint Simeon the Theologian. He's a fantastic saint. He is very convicting. If you read his sermons and it reminds you, no matter how good you think you are, you have a lot to go. Gregory Palamas, who's like a Maximus in the later days, in many ways. Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, which we don't know a lot about his particulars, but his writings are clearly Gregory Palamas. In like every other page in some of his books, it's Maximus and Dionysius, because those are like the great theologians.
Well, may they all intercede for us to our Christ throughout our lives. Father, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners, and would you be kind enough to end us off with a prayer?
I would. My final advice is Orthodoxy is serious and it's real. Don't take it lightly. Don't take the injunctions from the church lightly. It is, we hear in the Psalms, I meditated upon the law of the Lord day and night. If we're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or someone else, we're going to study a lot to be good at what we're doing. And Orthodoxy is the same thing. We have to every day make it our own. We have to every day internalize it. And some days it's difficult and some days it's hard, but it's our daily challenge. And we've taken it up. We cannot put it down. And there's so many, the sad thing today, there's so many, particularly I'm a convert, so I talk to converts a lot. There's so many people who come into the church and they leave the church. And they leave the church because they have not made it real. They've been focused on the esoteric and the exotic And Orthodoxy is only exotic for like a year. And then you get used to everything. Everything we do and everything, whatever, is we're used to it. And people who want to focus on that, that's not going to sustain it. So I would take it serious we're in the great fast. If you haven't fasted, if you haven't made an effort, go to your church, go to your pre-sanctified liturgies, read the Holy Fathers, and remember that for all the work we do, there is a reward. For the prayers of Holy Master, O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Amen.
That,
Father, I
is that
can't.
enough?
Yeah, that was perfect. I can't thank you enough for coming on. In our next interview, we'll be talking to Father Stefan Djork, and
Oh,
at
I
some
know that
point,
name.
really, he's in the Serbian Archdiocese, I believe.
It sounds familiar.
Well, I'll send you his episode when we get around to it. And
Yeah.
at some point, we will continue our readings of Wounded by Love, the life and the wisdom of Elder now Saint Porphyrios. Until then, Panagia Mazisu, may our Lord Jesus Christ watch over you all. May all the saints intercede for us, and we will talk to you all later.
Okay.
Απολύασος φύση ο Θείος μου Υιός, σιγά κατάκησε όλος τη αμαρτία και παρεδόθης τελείως τη ραθυμία της εξαναστήσης εκείμενο.
Kyrie Iisus Christe eleison, 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 Kyrie Iisus Christe eleison.